The central organism around which the entire storyline of Claymore revolves is the race of humanoid shapeshifting monsters named Yoma. These monsters are introduced as demons that eat humans, steal their appearances, and then proceed to terrorize each of the 47 sectors of Claymore's continent. They've devastated families, villages, towns, and are, in some cases, the reason young girls become Claymores. Well, from an anatomical perspective, that's true for all Claymores, but we're talking about the desire to join the organization in particular over here. Hunting Yoma to protect humanity is the primary purpose of the Silver-Eyed Slayers, but for a long time, none of them thought to ask why that was the case, and by the time they did, the truth became evident, and Yoma became far more disturbing entities than they'd ever been before. So, in this video, we're going to take a look at the truth about Yoma and how it changed the world of Claymore forever. They're both the basis of their strength and the target of their hunts. Yoma as understood at the beginning of Claymore. From the very first chapter of Claymore, we're told that the Yoma are highly dangerous predators that attack human beings much like any other apex predator would. Like big cats, these monsters target the innards of humans first and foremost, but unlike any other naturally occurring predator, they have one distinct advantage. They can camouflage themselves better than chameleons. That's because Yoma can shapeshift into the form of whoever they kill, making them indistinguishable except through behavior. And in most cases, even that isn't the case, because Yoma are masters of deception and imitation, and they can kill any person that comes even close to discovering their secret. Their presence cannot be detected by humans except through the trail of dead bodies that they leave in their wake, and humanity has no real way to identify which people have been turned. This is one of the biggest reasons why Claymores are hired to deal with these monsters. The Silver-Eyed Slayers are exceptionally strong and far more skilled in battle than your average human, but what makes them crucial to hunting Yoma is their ability to detect them. This is because they themselves are made with the flesh and blood of Yoma, which gives them access to abilities that make detecting them possible. A Claymore detects a Yoma by reading their Yoki. Yoki is the natural energy that comes off of a Yoma. This is what presumably allows them to shapeshift into people and in rare cases even grow wings. Generally, Yoma hunt alone, but sometimes they might get together and hunt in packs. Cities with a large number of unexplained deaths are usually where the latter occurs, but a Claymore is strong enough to deal with them herself for the most part. In fact, even someone as lowly as number 47 Claire can dispatch 5 of them all by herself if the circumstances are correct, but Yoma are creatures that are constantly evolving. The general pattern is that people call in Claymores as soon as they get suspicious that Yoma have infested their cities, and a few days later, the Claymore assigned to their quadrant arrives to eliminate the problem. There are cases where years of isolation have made Yoma so powerful that using their base form skills doesn't cut it in a fight. When Claire goes to Rabona for the first time, she fights a Yoma in its church that's intelligent enough to have shapeshifted into a corpse to avoid detection. Claire ends up having to release her Yoma energy to deal with it, and that's a risky move, considering losing control of it turns Claymores into rampaging monsters. But that's the only example we've had of a Yoma being powerful enough to actually pressure a base level Claymore. Later in the series, Claire becomes powerful enough to kill an army as powerful as the Rabona Yoma without breaking a sweat or even relying on her newly acquired abilities. In fact, Yoma as a threat are pretty quickly replaced by a problem much closer to home: awakened beings. Awakened beings are Claymores who have overexerted their use of Yoma energy to the point of no return. When a Claymore awakens, they become much like a Yoma, only far more powerful and ravenous. Awakened beings are slaughterhouses, and though they don't exactly shapeshift, their true forms are powerful enough to require teams of 4 Claymores for the job. And one of those Claymores is usually a single-digit rank, which means they're using the cream of the crop always. The organization tries preventing the creation of awakened beings with the black card policy. Claymores have the standing order to slaughter any of their comrades that go beyond the limit in the field to minimize casualties. But if a Claymore reaches awakening state far away from her sisters, she sends out a black card to one of them, basically asking them to euthanize her before she turns. This containment policy only works when a Claymore is powerful enough to enact it, and while it does work, it also doesn't sometimes. The world in which most of the series is set is divided into 4 quadrants, and only one of them is under the organization's direct control. The other 3 are controlled by awakened beings, former number 1s in fact, and they're under the mercy of their awakened armies. About a third of the way through the series, hunting Yoma becomes irrelevant because they're replaced by monsters like Riffle, Dauf, Rigardo, Isley, and Priscilla. We thought this was strange because weren't they supposed to be the primary focus of the series according to the intro? Besides, awakened beings are the organization's fault because they're basically Claymores that they couldn't contain in time. The fact that Isley created an army of 27 of them is proof that they've been failing for generations generations. And yet, even after the time skip, the hunting of Yoma remains their primary objective, apart from self-defense. It didn't make sense why they would still keep going after the very things that created their little Claymore berserker problem in the first place, but that became clear after the time skip, when former number 6 Phantom Miria revealed the truth about the Yoma and the world of Claymore. The product of an experiment on beings from another world. The reality about Yoma. The true nature of a Yoma is one of the most pivotal and shocking revelations in the story. Initially, we're told that they were monstrous demonic creatures that terrorized humanity by feeding on them and stealing their appearances. They're the primary antagonists that the Claymores are created to hunt and destroy. However, as the series progresses, it's revealed that the origins and true nature of Yoma are far more complex than anyone initially believed. In chapters 79 and 80, it's revealed that Yoma aren't natural creatures, but are in fact artificially created beings. What's even more shocking is that they were created by the Organization, the same group that creates and controls the Claymores. After partially awakening on a mission, Phantom Miria decided to hide that fact and investigate her employers because she knew they'd kill her anyways, and besides, she'd discovered something. In her travels, she'd gone to the edge of the Claymore Continent and come across a village in the hills that had no idea what Claymores or Yoma were. Up until that point in the story, it was believed that the world was only as big as the 47 quadrants, and that the Claymore Continent was the only inhabitable place in the world. But when Miria saw that village, she realized that was a lie, because it meant that Yoma hadn't been plaguing humanity for centuries. They were introduced to them recently, so she started digging around, and what she found was horrifying. Turns out, the Organization wasn't just fighting the Yoma, it was also creating them. The reason Yoma appearances and Claymore births pretty much coincided with one another was because they did. Miria's research tells her that the Claymore Continent is actually the Claymore Island, and that this island lies in an ocean beyond which there's a much larger mainland. On this mainland, there are two parties locked in an eternal battle with one another, and one of those parties is the parent of the Organization. The other birthed the single greatest bioweapon breakthrough of the Organization, that being the Yoma. The other party that fights on the mainland against the sponsors of the Organization are called the Asakaram, but more colloquially, they're known as the Dragon's Descendants. This is because they're massive, possess nearly impervious bodies, and have abilities that are as fantastical as a fire-breathing dragon from myth. In their normal forms, they're large humanoid hermaphrodites with a third eye and a 200-year lifespan, but when an Asakaram enters battle, they undergo a transformation, aka awakening. The Dragon's Descendants had the foundation for awakening in their DNA, and the Organization was aware of that. They wanted to develop a weapon powerful enough to hold against or even defeat enemies like the Dragon's Descendants, so they decided to use their enemies against their own kind. The Organization captured 2 living Asakaram specimens in both awakened and non-awakened forms, kept them in perpetual stasis, and started using their flesh bit by bit to create the new generation of soldiers. The birth of the Yoma was the first step in these experiments. The Organization combined slivers of tissue from both types of Asakaram before they necrotized it in order to create an organism that could potentially tap into both sets of powers. What they actually created was instead an as of yet unseen parasite which could only work for them once it found its way into a human host. Once inside, the parasite takes over the host's brain, taking control of their body and turning them into Yoma. In truth, the parasite is what's actually the Yoma, but you can see where the confusion might have come from. It's not that these monsters could shapeshift like evil spirits from Japanese folklore. When a Yoma unleashes its powers, the host body takes on the familiar pseudo-reptilian appearance we're all familiar with. That process, as well as the hunt in general, causes the host body to deteriorate to the point where it's important for the parasite to make a jump. This is probably also why killing Yoma and awakened beings is only possible by taking out their head, because that's where the Yoma actually resides. In Claymores, the flesh and blood of transformed humans is used as the basis, so the consciousness takeover aspect of a Yoma is negated, but it doesn't make things any less creepy. What makes this revelation so disturbing is the realization that the Yoma, who have caused so much suffering and death, were created by humans themselves. The Organization, which presents itself as a protector of humanity, is in fact responsible for the very monsters it claims to fight against, all in the hopes of finding a key to fighting a foreign enemy that most people don't even know exists. This knowledge completely upends the moral foundation of their world, revealing that the true villains aren't the Yoma, but the shadowy figures within the Organization, manipulating events from behind the scenes across space and time. Many Claymores who have dedicated their lives to battling these creatures discover that they have been pawns in a much larger and darker game, chief of them being the 7 ghosts of Alphonse, Miria, Claire, Deneve, Helen, and the rest of the partially awakened that survived the Battle of the North before the time skip realize that they're all test subjects, and what the Organization really wants is a dragon's descendant that they can control however they please. They make significant progress in that department with the twins twins Alicia and Beth, but as always, hubris proves to be the undoing of their madness, and the organization never quite succeeds in building and using the weapon that it wanted anyway. But the very fact that they made a problem just so they could get rich off of it, solving it forever, whilst using said problem to bioengineer soldiers that can take on alien threats of any kind without failure, that's going beyond trying to protect, and the Claymores knew it. That's why, at the end of the manga, they vow to protect their home no matter what, and they make no attempt to go to the mainland and confront things. The organization had already ruined their lives the day they got their stigmata, so we suppose coming to learn it wasn't all for a cyclical life of killing and being killed was more of a relief than actual death. But as for the true nature of Yoma and Claymore, you now know. It was a parasite that was the result of genetic and biological experimentation by the organization, and they were used to create and discover soldiers that could handle Claymore's version of the Dark Continent. Marvelous verdict! The horror of the true nature of Yoma is compounded by the fact that they were designed to prey on humans by humans. They infiltrated human settlements, assumed the forms of those they would kill, and spread fear and distrust among people. But as the series progresses and we learn more about the world in general, we realize that the real enemy isn't the mindless beasts that terrorize humanity, but the humans who created and perpetuate the cycle of violence for their own ends. That would be the organization, and every single drop of blood that has been spilled since their little Asakaram project began has been on their hands. And yes, that includes the deaths caused by Yoma. But that's just our opinion. What are yours? We want to know your thoughts on these horrible monsters in the comments down below, and we'll see you guys in the next one. Until then, this is Wizard Wheezy signing off, so have a marvelous day.